Hey, this is Joe from Home Studio Corner. We're going to do some listening today. One of the common questions I get from folks who are fairly new to audio and recording has to do with the terminology that we use. We say things like, that sounds really warm, or that sounds muddy, or that sounds harsh. And we don't do a great job, speaking for myself at least, of explaining what that means. Now, as you can imagine, those are fairly subjective terms, so my definition of harsh might be different from Graham Cochran's definition of harsh. But in general, typically when we say muddy or warm, we mean a handful of things. And I want to share with you today what I think those things mean that can help you develop your vocabulary as an audio engineer, producer, musician. Now, the first question is, why does it matter? And in some ways it doesn't, but in a lot of ways it does, because you want to be able to express what you're trying to get across. In the book, Here, There, and Everywhere by Jeff Emmerich, he talks about the difference between Paul McCartney and John Lennon. Paul knew exactly what he wanted in the studio. I want this sound. And John was more, I kind of want it to sound like I'm underwater. He didn't know exactly what it was he wanted. He knew it when he heard it, but it was hard to explain, and that caused some frustration. Now, obviously, they got by with that, but it kind of paints the picture that we need to develop our ability to talk about what we're doing, to be able to explain to other people what it is we like or don't like. Or if you're getting feedback from somebody like me, you hire me to do a mix critique, and I say, hey, it sounds too warm or too muddy right here. If you don't know what that is, then that's not as helpful, right? So we're going to talk about that today. First of all, I'm going to give you a couple examples of things that I feel like are warm. Now, these are all my music, so I'm terribly biased, but I'm actually going to show you some that I feel are a little harsh and don't work super well, and give you some examples of both. So the first one I want to show you is a song I released several years ago. It's called Where Are You Now? And it starts out with just some guitar and light drums, and then full band kind of kicks in at the end of the first chorus, and it always, to me, it feels very warm to me. It's got this depth and this big low end and this low mid range that just feels really good. So let me play it for you, and then we'll talk about it.
Where are you now? Where are you now? In the rush of great waters, can you hear me when I call?
So everything there, to me, feels balanced, but it leans towards the warm side of things, meaning there's a lot going on in the mid-range, in the low mids, and in the lows. We've got kick drum and bass taking care of the low end. You can see there's a lot of information down here. And then up in the 200 to 500 hertz range, that's where a lot of the guitar and keyboard energy is happening. And we can still hear the cymbals, we can still hear the hi-hat and some of the brightness of the snare drum, but the bulk of the sound that makes up what we're hearing is down here. Now, I'm not a big fan of using spectrum analyzers for anything practical, but it's helpful a little bit here to show what I'm talking about. So listen to that again. The bulk of the sound is happening kind of in the mid-range, so that gives it a warm sound. Now, if we were to take an EQ on this, we could make it sound not warm and make it sound harsh pretty quickly.
Where are you now? Where are you now? In the rush of great waters, can you hear me when I call?
Now, the difference there is really striking, and it almost makes the final version without the EQ, it almost sounds muddy. And that's when you go from having a nice amount of low end to having too much low end, that's when it crosses over into muddy. I personally feel like this doesn't get muddy, but you might think it's muddy, and that's okay. Let me show you what I think would sound muddy on this song. Let's go over here to where the drums come in. It's out of balance. There are too much lows and too much mids, too much low mids. There's more of those than there are of anything else, so it's not balanced. What our ears like to hear is a balance. We like to hear the drums balanced with the bass, balanced with the guitars, but we also like to hear the lows and mids and highs balanced as well. That doesn't mean they look exactly identical across here, but if you look, see this kind of diagonal line here? If I just hit play, this is kind of showing kind of the angle you typically want in a mix. I know I'm straying off topic, but if you see this white line that's angling down to the right, there are measurably less highs and more lows, and that's kind of what our ears like to hear. That's a fairly balanced sound. So if I were to use an EQ to boost the high end, it would probably sound like there's too much highs and wouldn't sound right. If we did something like this.
If I couldn't be the commander.
So if we look at that, it's straight across, but it doesn't sound right? It sounds like there's way too much high end. So don't use the meters to set your EQ levels. Just know that that's kind of what a warm, full-sounding mix. It'll have a nice bunch of mid-range and low end, and then you'll still be able to hear the top end as well. Another example of something that I feel is nice and warm is my song It's Okay, which is all acoustic. Comes across very warm and full.
Shadow.
So it's just towing that line between nice and warm and not being too muddy. But if we were to mudify it, it would sound like this. Or make it too harsh. Those are the two extremes of music that I hear from people. They either, if there's a big flaw in the mix, it's either that it is just there's too much low end and low mid, so it comes across as muddy as opposed to balanced and warm, or there's too much high frequency, so it comes across as harsh instead of bright and having lots of detail. Those are kind of the extremes. So you want to find yourself in the nice middle ground where you've got enough low end and enough high end to sound balanced without any one frequency range being dominant. So here's a song I released long time ago. This is about 10 years ago. And I didn't record the guitar super well, and I don't love the way it came out, but listen to it. It's okay, but to me, overall, it's missing some warmth, and it's a little bit harsh. It's got this hoo, hoo, hoo sort of frequency every time I strum the guitar because I mic'd the guitars too close. And even though I did a crap load of EQ on these guitars, I remember it even to this day, they just came out sounding kind of okay. Take a listen again. You can see it on the EQ there, right in here. That frequency there is just cutting through, and it just makes it not sound good. And as you get, it's not a full band song, but as you get to vocals and everything else, I ended up making the vocals, I think, a little too crispy, a little too bright, a little too much top end, probably because the guitars were so muddy, I needed the vocal to carry over the guitars. So it just took a lot of work. If I had recorded them better and gotten better tones, I think it would have worked better. It's okay. But it sounds more like a mess of sounds. There's a lot of mid-range, and there's a lot of low mid in that guitar, and then the vocal's too bright. There's just a lot of things that if I were to do it again, it would sound a lot better. Here's an example of a song in a similar style that I did just a couple of years ago. And listen to how, I'm just going to flip back and forth between the songs. And before I tell you what to listen for, just listen to the differences. What do you hear when I flip back and forth between these two songs? Interestingly enough, what I just played for you is both just acoustic guitars. There's no drums. There's a little djembe in the second one, but there's no bass, right? It's just acoustic guitars, and yet one sounds kind of like plastic, and it doesn't have any low end. There's no nice, big, warm low end to it. That's this one. It's just got that muddy mid-range, that frequency. It doesn't have any of that nice, deep low end that we want, whereas this one does. Now we can make this one sound like the first one, which I think would be kind of funny. Let's put an EQ on, just on this song, and let's see if we can make it sound like the first one. Okay, here we go. Whoop, here we go. Anyway, sorry, that was ridiculous. But you get, look at the EQ that I had to do to make the other one not to make the second one sound as bad as the first one. Here it is in its natural form. So I honestly don't know if that was clear at all, if that helped you kind of identify a few things. If not, leave a comment below and let me know what other questions you have. Maybe I can follow up with some more examples in the future. But that's, to me, those are the big problems we face. When you start out mixing, you're going to fall into one of two camps. Your mixes are going to be either too muddy, meaning too much low mids, too much lows, or they're going to be too harsh, meaning too much upper mids and too much highs. You're going to fall into one of those camps. I don't know which one you're going to fall into. For me, I started off too muddy, and then I made my way. You're going to swing like a pendulum to the other side. So I started off too muddy, then I swung over to too harsh for a while, and then I landed back more in kind of a balanced center. Now, I still, from project to project, will tend towards one or the other. I tend to mix a little more darker, a little warmer sounding, which can kind of veer close to the edge of being muddy and warm. And you may think some of the stuff I produce is muddy and not warm, and it's just muddy, and that's fine. Or some stuff you might think is too bright. A lot of it is subjective. How much brightness becomes harsh is kind of on an individual basis, but we can all agree that things do need to be balanced, and there needs to be a fairly consistent amount of lows, mids, and highs in the mix. So if you fall in one category or the other, just being aware of it is a big first step. And then take actions in your recording, in your producing, and obviously in your mixing to counteract that tendency that you have to make things either too muddy or too harsh. All right, thanks so much for watching this video. If you'd like to know more about my process for mixing, specifically my 5-step kind of guide of the way to go through a mix from start to finish, you need to check out my 5-step mix guide. You can get that at 5stepmix.com. It's absolutely free. If you like this video, you'll love that. All right, that's it for me. I'll see you in the next one. Later.